Good morning, everybody. I hope everyone's having an awesome day. Today, we're going to dive into what I would call one of the best generations of video game consoles, and that is the fifth generation. Now, this generation had a lot of awesome consoles. You know, it had the Sega Saturn, PS1, N64, it had the Jaguar, the ridiculously overpriced 3DO, really did have a wide range of variety. Atari and Sega were still in the game at this point. Panasonic was dipping their feet in it. It really was a great time to be a gamer. There was a lot of selection, and if you had a lot of money, you could own them all. I didn't. However, I'm going to make a list here. I'm going to tell you which ones I think are the winners, which ones are the losers, and we're going to crown the king here, guys. This generation of consoles ran from about 1993 to 2006. So you have about a 13-year window of these all being players in the game. It was a long window. This was back in the day when, you know, the PS1 and PS2 both had long life cycles. They overlapped each other. It's just how she went back in the old days, guys. So I'm going to say the number 5 pick here is the 3DO. Now, the 3DO was an awesome machine. It was just too expensive for the time, guys. Now, this machine retailed for around $700 US back in the 90s. And anyone that grew up and through that generation, you know how expensive that really was. Really crazy amount of money, honestly. It sold under 2 million units, so it wasn't like a huge flop. But at the time, it was just not good enough for them to bring ahead a Panasonic 3DO version 2. And that's just the way she goes. The best-selling game on this platform was Gex. And there's only about 254 games in the total library for the console. A few problems here. You know, that price point negates so many buyers. The 90s was a depressed period. There wasn't a lot of money floating around, especially the early 90s to mid 90s. And people just simply couldn't afford this. For context, the first car I ever bought, I paid $1,295 for it. So, you know, it's like a car or two of these consoles, right? Absolute ridiculousness. And add to the fact a very small and weak game library, just not meant to be for Panasonic and this big conglomerate that got together and thought they would make a console and, you know, capture the market. Very unfortunate. Very expensive unit, even buying today. If you find one in the box, you know, you're going to be a minimum of $500, guys. I'm pretty sure even more than that. The games are expensive for it as well. It's a very interesting console, but it just didn't have the chops to compete with the other players. And on that note, we'll say the Panasonic is my 5th place pick. In at number 4, I have to go with the Atari Jaguar. I'll go over some reasons why. First, it was commercially a bomb. In all honesty, the only reason I ranked it ahead of the 3DO is because of the price point. It only retailed for about $249 US. It was a standard price console at the time. Other than that, the 3DO was a better machine. But I still am going to rank the Jaguar higher just because its affordability, the looks of the console and the feel of it. It just is a better looking machine. It was cheaper. It was just an unfortunate circumstance for Atari at this time. They were really struggling, and this pretty much just stuck a fork in them. They were pretty much done at this point, guys. Very unfortunate. The top selling game on it was Alien vs. Predator at 85,000. They only sold about 150,000 units of this. It was very sad. But it is a very sad time when these console makers make their last console and they go tits up or whatever. It's really unfortunate. Like Atari, I don't believe is tits up. They make games and stuff like that. They're doing just fine, I'm sure. But as for their console days, they were numbered. It's a really interesting machine. It was a very powerful machine for the money. Honestly, the design was very sleek for the time. I really think it's interesting. There was a CD add-on, and I think Atari kind of screwed themselves here because it really was a 32-bit console that they marketed as a 64-bit console. I think part of it was, you know, 64-bit and part of it was 32, and you know, when you get into that gray area where you're kind of lying to your customers, you don't really want to do that. And it's very unfortunate. I really like the box and the console. If I can get my greedy little hands on one, I'm definitely going to do that because it's one I would like to add to my collection. And that's why I'm going to put the Atari Jaguar at number 4. Okay, guys, so number 3 on the list. It pains me that Sega fell down this far, but I'm going to have to go with the Sega Saturn. Now, I have a nice Sega Saturn. It was my brother's. I'm going to keep that one. I really like the machine. And I got about 10 games with it. I really want to get back into collecting the Sega Saturn stuff and Dreamcast as well. However, the writing was starting to be on the wall here for Sega, unfortunately. And then after the Saturn, the Dreamcast came out, and then that was pretty much it for Sega making consoles. Very unfortunate, guys. Sega was an awesome company. They had good IPs. You know, they made good games. I really don't know why the wheels fell off. Maybe they were just misfortunate. I believe Sega was losing money at this point, guys. However, the console still did sell over 9 million units, so it wasn't like a mega failure, but it definitely was a step down from the Genesis days. Feeling the reason they kept putting out versions of the Genesis was they just weren't prepared for the next generation, and it's very unfortunate. That's why I think the 32X came out, and then it was a stopgap to this, and yeah, there's just a bunch of weird stuff going on with Sega at the time, guys. But anyways, still is a solid 3 in my list. Like I said, sold 9 million units. There's about 1,100 games on the console, so there is a huge library for this if you are into collecting it. It's definitely a cool console to collect. You come in the big jewel case boxes like the original PS1 games and, you know, the 32X. Really cool to put on a shelf. They display really well. And Sega did still have a great library of games for this. You know, the Panzer Dragoons and Virtua Fighters, X-Men, Street Fighter. A little on the pricier side. You know, it was around $400 US for this, so it wasn't a cheap one. It was right in the middle. You know, you had the 3DO up high. A little pricey. But again, Sega had a bunch of games on this that were really good, and it really is a shame what happened to Sega in the long run. It still pains me to this day because I really do love it. Sega Saturn slides into my number 3 spot. I'm going to say at my number 2 pick, we're going to go with the N64. Kind of close, but not, but I'll get into the reasons why. So the N64 came out, sold about 33 million units. Very good commercial success for Nintendo. All the usual suspects came out on the console, the Donkey Kongs, the Marios, of Nintendo's big IPs. Really did help Nintendo keep going with their momentum that they had built in previous iterations of their consoles. It came in around $200 US, so it was one of the lower priced ones. A very big benefit, and these console makers have to realize they want to sell more units, sell them at a lower price, and then make the money on the back end on the games and stuff. And that's exactly what Nintendo did. They knew their audience, they catered to them, made this a huge success, and it was a really good console, and it really is today. I think I have one in my game box. I don't have too many games for it, unfortunately. Something I'll get back into. You guys know how the Nintendo stuff. These generations are getting pretty expensive to collect now, so you really gotta be mindful of what you're buying and collecting. They have a decent game library. There's about 386 games in the library. You know, Star Fox, Donkey Kong, Conker's GoldenEye, you know, the Zelda games, Perfect Dark. You know, it pretty much had everything that you would really want in a console. Playing the Mario Kart game, you know, very fun game. All this stuff on this, you know, it was fun just to sit down with buddies and play and horse around, and nothing was too serious on it. I'll say Nintendo didn't allow a lot of shovelware type games on this console, as what it seems like to me anyways. There wasn't a huge library, but the library they did have, most of the games were really good, and I think this was the right decision in my opinion for Nintendo. So at my number 2, I gotta go with the N64, guys. Now, as you know, by process of elimination, my number 1 pick, I had to go with the PS1. So the main reason is the sales. Over 100 million units shipped and sold on this baby. It was the biggest success of this console's generation. Had good graphics, you know, went with the CD platform, didn't have carts or anything like that. This generation and the next generation for Sony were absolutely crazy. The amount of sales, when you figure they probably sold 260 million consoles in the 2 generations combined, you know, huge money makers for Sony. Huge player in the video game market, and they still are, honestly. They're one of the top dogs, right? Best-selling game on the platform was Gran Turismo, just over 10 million copies sold. Not a big surprise. That is a Sony exclusive from what I remember, so probably had deals on it. And they are good games, and they still are good games on the platform. You know, Xbox got Forza. Sony's got Gran Turismo. It come in higher price than the N64. It was a $300 machine. Again, the graphics were better. This is no surprise. Nintendo is lucky. With their IPs, they can get away with a lot less processing power. So that's Nintendo's game. They do it good, guys. Sony really upped it here, and then the next gen, you had the PS2, and then Microsoft's Xbox came out, and this was really the beginning of the big three players. Once this gen ended, the next one started. It's pretty much been the same since then. It's just Sony and Microsoft jockeying for position, really. Now, the game library for the PS1, there's over 3,000 games, so by far and away, this was a massive library. It had everything on it you can imagine, guys. It had the Silent Hills, the Medal of Honors, all of Sony's IPs, Final Fantasies, Resident Evil, anything you could imagine was pretty much on this console. Like the PS2, thousands of titles and millions of copies of these games are still in circulation. And if you are collecting on this console, the games are still relatively reasonably priced for the most part. And there is so many of them that you can find them out in the wild. You can find them at game stores. And you can build your collection without bankrupting yourself, which is good as well. Fond memories of this machine. I played a ton of this with my brother. We were playing Medal of Honors and, just all of that sort of stuff. It was so fun, man. And I really wouldn't change it for the world, guys. It was just a really fun time in life. Yeah, I'll always have those memories of horsing around and squealing at each other in the PS1. It was just a good time to be a gamer. If you're liking the content, we'll do some more Bolo lists. We'll keep going with these game lists too, guys. It's really fun to go down memory lane with you guys and discuss the highs and lows of all these consoles and the old ones that have come and gone. If you have anything you'd like to add, please comment below. Let me know. I'd love to hear from you. As always, please like, subscribe. I appreciate every one of you. I hope everyone's having an awesome day. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.